Well, good afternoon. I'm Ern Bodvarson. I'm the Dean of the Atkinson Graduate School of Management. And I, along with my colleague, Dean Brian Galini of the College of Law, are absolutely delighted to welcome you to this panel discussion on healthcare. So welcome. Really, we're very happy you are here and that you can enjoy your lunches while we have this panel discussion. Today's panel discussion is the first of what we hope will be a series of regular events co-hosted and sponsored by our two academic units. And what Brian and I are really excited about is hosting a series of events that focus on the interface between management and law. And that's a huge interface. It's complicated, it's deep. And many of you are going to be seeking careers on the interface between management and law. So our first event in that regard features healthcare, an industry that truly lies on the interface of both the law and business professions. Healthcare is, I'm sure you will all agree, one of the most complicated, important, and lucrative industries around. It includes a unique blend of private, public, governmental, religious, for-profit, and not-for-profit entities, stimuli, and forces. Over the last 10 years, there have been three developments that have challenged this industry and reinforced its importance to us as a society. One is, of course, the landmark Affordable Care Act, the aging population, and then most recently, the COVID pandemic. So these cumulative developments have tested and buffeted the industry, and doing so has fueled the national debate about the social value of this industry and created new kinds of management, legal, and policy challenges for leaders in the healthcare industry. A couple of fun facts. Did you know that annual healthcare expenditures in the US are approximately $5 trillion? $5 trillion. That's close to 20% of US gross domestic product. Did you know that healthcare enterprises employ more than 1/8 of the US workforce? For example, US hospitals employ close to 5.2 million people.
So today's panel is really an opportunity for our management and law students and other interested members here of the Willamette community to come together and learn from seasoned leaders in the healthcare industry. And we're fortunate to have 4 seasoned leaders that span across both the business and the legal side. Our outstanding professionals include 3 Willamette alums, and all of whom have enjoyed exceptionally accomplished careers and come from various parts of the healthcare ecosystem. And it's our pleasure to introduce them to you, and my distinct pleasure to introduce our first panelist to you, Mr. Bradley King. Mr. King is a 2-time Willamette alum who graduated Willamette with a BA in biology and a Master of Administration from the Atkinson School. He is an alum of the famous Atkinson class of 1976, our first graduating class.
It might be infamous.
No, that's what the script said.
Okay.
This was back in the days before we offered the MBA degree. He's also a licensed CPA, licensed to practice in multiple states. He's enjoyed a long and distinguished career in serving senior leadership positions at major healthcare organizations around the country. He began his career at Arthur Young & Company, now known, of course, as Ernst & Young, doing auditing work and consulting for hospitals, insurers, and medical groups in the Pacific Northwest and in Alaska. He was then appointed controller and within a year CFO of Sacred Heart Medical Center in Eugene. And during his 9-year tenure at Sacred Heart, Mr. King was deeply involved with a number of significant acquisitions and led a number of major system development efforts. He then moved on to St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank, California, where he served as its CFO. And one of his most significant accomplishments at St. Joseph was leading a highly successful financial turnaround of the center. He moved on to Sun Health, a 300-hospital group purchasing organization based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sun Health subsequently merged into Premier Inc. and Clifton Larson Allen, a national CPA firm headquartered in Minneapolis. And during his 9 years with the organization, Mr. King led strategic planning, joint venture, M&A efforts in many parts of the country, and was also deployed by the organization to serve as interim CFO at various external organizations. In a then significant career move, Mr. King took a leave of absence from Clifton Larson Allen to join OHSU as Executive Vice President and CFO. And during his time at OHSU, the organization grew and prospered substantially. And 2 of his most significant accomplishments were leadership of the successful effort to acquire Pacific Cancer Centers and the installation of the Epic electronic health system. Following 4 years at OHSU, Mr. King returned to Clifton Larson Allen as his last full-time gig, and now in between enjoying retirement, he periodically continues to provide various types of consulting to support hospitals and medical groups.
Our second panelist is Mr. Kennedy Hawkins. Mr. Hawkins is also a two-time alum from Willamette. Following completion of a BS in political science from Oregon State University, he earned an MBA and a JD from Willamette, then capped off his educational career with an LLM in taxation from Southern Methodist University. Mr. Hawkins is the president of PT Northwest, a widely respected physical rehabilitation group at the state and national levels. He has been with the company for 30 years. Pretty much from after the time you graduated.
Yeah, I'm old, so.
In 2016, 17, 18, and 21, PT Northwest was named a top Oregon workplace by the Oregonian. Under his leadership, Mr. Hawkins has helped to transform the company into a locally and nationally recognized leader in physical rehabilitation services. He was instrumental in helping PT Northwest win the National Association of Rehabilitation Agencies, NARA, 2016 Innovation Award for its use of data analytics. Mr. Hawkins serves as a member of the NARA board and has served as its president, past president, vice president, treasurer, and regional coordinator. He is the winner of NARA's George G. Olson Award and NARA's Service Award. Mr. Hawkins is a nationally recognized public speaker and is deeply involved in giving back to the community, currently serving on numerous nonprofit boards.
It's my pleasure to next introduce Ms. Catherine Katie Dobler.
I'm Melanie Mouse, I'm assuming that you. Oh, wait, no.
A seasoned leader in the local healthcare industry, Ms. Dobler graduated just last year from the MBA for Professionals program here at Willamette. She took her undergraduate degree at the University of Puget Sound. She is vice president of Salem Health Medical Group, which is part of the Salem Health Hospitals and Clinics. She previously served as COO at the Portland Clinic, and the Salem Medical Group spans 2 counties here in the Willamette Valley, anchored by over 50 primary care providers and employs more than 500 employees. In addition to her leadership positions at Salem Health, she currently sits on the Comagine Health Community Board and was previously its chair. She served as the executive director of the Portland Coordinated Care Association, where she was instrumental in facilitating collaboration with member groups in the development of shared value-based contracts. Ms. Dobler is also a national speaker on value-based contracting, total cost of care, and the importance of collaboration with key partners and providers in the community.
And our fourth panelist, Professor Bruce Howell. Professor Howell graduated with a BS from University of Michigan and MS from University of North Texas and took his law degree from the University of Michigan. He is a distinguished professor from practice and director of the new health law certificate program in the Willamette College of Law and has practiced healthcare law for 45 years. Formerly with the Portland law firm Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt, Professor Howell was among the founders of the Dallas, Texas, Bar Association's health law section and one of the first board-certified health lawyers in the state of Texas. He is a past chair of the Texas Bar Association health law section and is admitted to practice law in the states of New York, Texas, Oregon, and Washington. In his career, Professor Powell has represented companies and individuals in healthcare governmental investigations and assisted clients in structuring transactions to comply with health law regulatory requirements. He has created compliance programs and consulted on corporate governance and tax enforcement matters in nonprofit tax healthcare work. Professor Howell is experienced in litigating cases related to healthcare insurance, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or otherwise known as ERISA, health law regulatory issues, and the Affordable Care Act, as well as serving as an expert witness in these areas. Here at Willamette, Professor Howell teaches Health Law 1 and 2, Medical Malpractice Law, and the Law of Biomedicine. So we are delighted to have all four of you here. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to be with us today. So the agenda for the remainder of this event is as follows. There will be a 40-minute panel discussion during which the panel will be asked 4 questions. We'll spend about 10 minutes on each question. Each panelist will be asked to provide a response to the question, and then time permitting, the panelists can discuss the question as a group. Following the panel discussion, we'll use the rest of our time for audience Q&A, which will be facilitated by Dean Galini. So without further ado, let's begin with question one. And the panelists were sent the questions in advance, so they've had some time to think about the questions. Okay. So we see a significant intersection between law and business here in academia, in academic spaces. But outside of the academy, can you talk a little bit about how those intersections play out in your day-to-day experiences? If you would, provide some examples from your own careers of how in practice you see the intersection between law and business. So who would like to go first? We don't have assigned ordering here, but Kennedy, shall we start with you?
Oh boy, line of fire first. Thanks, I really appreciate that, Dean. That was amazing.
Those in seat.
Yeah, those in seat. First I want to say I'm just honored to be a part of this. I'm super stoked to be a part of this. Willamette holds a special place in my heart, so I was very thankful to be asked and to be a part of it. So, and I'm one of those weird joint degree people. So here's what I would say to you is, if understanding the intersection between law and business and healthcare allows you to see an opportunity or an issue from multiple perspectives, and that's important because a lot of people just see things from maybe one or two perspectives, and that's not a bad thing. But if you understand how the pieces fit together, you can see issues. You can walk into a room and understand the multiple issues that a situation may arise. So let me give you an example of that. What does that look like in my world? So a couple of years ago, we wanted to get a piece of intellectual property from Intermountain Healthcare. So Intermountain Healthcare, PD Northwest is about 140 employees. Intermountain Healthcare is 37,000 employees. Okay, Intermountain Healthcare is a top 5 organization. Their running mates are Mayo, John Hopkins, and Cleveland. So they had a piece of intellectual property. We wanted to license from them. They'd never done that before in their company's history. And so what we said is like, would you do that? And so we got actually into a room and we started having some conversations. So we walk in that room and we can, because of the understanding of the intersection in law and business and healthcare, you can easily identify alignment issues. You can identify the legal compliance issues that would be in play here, technology issues, operational issues, and probably most importantly, when you bring something into an organization that you're going to use on a daily basis is what I call kind of those operational or org behavior issues. So I would say what you're doing right now, actually coming together and having this conversation on the intersection of business and law, I think just that puts you in a really nice place in your careers.
I can add on to that. That's okay. Yeah, great points.
And we love Salem Health too. Just by the way, they're awesome and they've done a fantastic job in the pandemic.
Thank you. It takes a team, takes a village. I mean, I echo what you say, and as an operational leader, so I've been in operations, and prior to that, I was in human resources actually. But as an operational leader, you need to be able to look at all pieces of it, whether or not I don't have a JD, but whatever degrees you hold, I think it's really important that anyone in a leadership role really sees all the pieces, because you can bring in the experts then. So, I mean, we deal with contracts, for example, every single day from when we employ a clinician, that's a contract. It's a long contract. And from when we have shared services with organizations like OHSU, for example, to come and provide services in Salem, to insurance contracts, right? This is how we get paid from insurance companies. And so situations like he was just describing with Intermountain Health, but it's every single day there are components of law, HR, operations, and you've got to be able to look at that and know who to bring into the room in order to make an informed decision.
Well, I think of a variety of interfaces with law, and particularly as it relates to payers. Federal government is the major payer for healthcare within the United States through the Medicare program and through its participation in the Medicaid program as well. Most hospitals, and I've worked with hospitals primarily for most of my career, have in fact more than 50% of their payments coming from the federal government or through the states, through the Medicaid program. As a result of that, to be a participating provider in those programs, you have to abide by those programs' regulations. Those are a multitude greater than the actual laws that have been passed, as you would guess. And yet they're just as powerful as those laws. And then you think of some of the other restrictions that have been put on healthcare by legal constraints. One of those is EMTALA. EMTALA is the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which means that a hospital that purports to have an emergency room can't turn away anybody who has emergency services needed. And so regardless of whether there's an ability to pay, the hospital has to take care of those people. That was an early sort of social responsibility that hospitals took on. Now, they were forced to legally, but they had to take that on. Star clause are another major issue. Star clause address kind of the issue of tax, really, that relates to private benefit versus community benefit. Not-for-profit hospitals, which I've worked with, have to primarily operate for the community's benefit, not for individuals' benefit. So in the case of, particularly when I first started, most physician practices, those practices were for-profit organizations. And so a not-for-profit working with a for-profit has certain restrictions. And under the Star Clause, that meant, for instance, that free services couldn't be provided to physicians. They had to make a payment for them, that you couldn't use inducements to get them to bring patients to the hospital, a variety of things that way, which had numerous different interpretations of safe harbors, all sorts of other issues that I'm sure our professor here could explain very thoroughly for us. And so you have to work within those kinds of restrictions. I would give you one final example. In the state of California, just to the south of us here, there was a emergency room nurse. Her name is Jackie Spire, who, when I was with the hospital in Burbank, became a state assemblywoman. Excellent person. But she felt like hospitals were understaffing. And so she sponsored within the California Assembly a law that basically said if you have X number of patients in your general acute care nursing units, you have to have this many hours of nursing care available for them, staffed and available for them. Well, now that didn't really evaluate what the individual needs of each patient were. But of course, that didn't make much difference. It was a law that said you had to do that. And so we had to work through different ways to address that. She subsequently became a U.S. Congresswoman, and in Congress has continued to push those kinds of things. Very, very helpful in general to hospitals and healthcare systems. But although she's retiring this year, was not always in sync with what hospitals needed to be able to most efficiently and effectively operate.
Okay, I guess I'm the anchor here. I can make you all health lawyers in exactly 3 seconds. If it makes sense in business and healthcare, it's illegal. Just remember that. I don't know if you're not young enough, or you're too young to remember a Saturday Night Live skit of the late 70s called Shimmer, where Gilda Radner and Ben Aykroyd are arguing over this can of whipped cream, saying it's a dessert topping. It's a floor wax. And Chevy Chase comes in and goes, it's both. And that's what healthcare is. It's a business and it's a profession. And I was with the American Bar Group this weekend, and we were still talking about, well, what is a health lawyer? I mean, if you take a look at in certification programs, one I took, we had like 22 subcategories to study. Everything from genetics to hospital operations to regulatory issues. So for my classes, what I like to do is I like to say healthcare is an industry. Health law is the study and resolution of the inherent conflicts in the American healthcare system. Now think about that for a minute. We have professionals who are dedicated, as are we as lawyers, to do the right thing. But we have insurance companies and equity partners and so forth who are focused on the bottom line. And that's where the rubber hits the road.
So turning to our next question, I want to talk a little bit about how you've applied your educational experiences to your careers. And so kind of a two-part, starting with the general. I wonder if you could kind of reflect back and think about how you actually applied education writ large to careers, and then drill in a little bit more specifically. Are there a couple of classes out there that you would recommend to students that, well, I'm really glad I took those classes, or correspondingly, I wish those classes had been offered? Kind of a nod to the two deans. Perhaps there are curricular opportunities out there for us.
I guess I'll go.
I was a recent graduate. I
Go, you
can
go.
do it. Gosh, I mean, you utilize education all the time, right? So let me just talk about a course that I took that, again, I just graduated from the MBA program. And it was a 2-semester course, and it was called Philanthropic Investments for Community Impact. It was like 5 people in the class. And it was awesome. It was hands-on. We had to speak in front of a board, and I've been in management and in boardrooms for 20 plus years. And so there were definitely people that had never been before a board. And had I, going back 20 years, it would have been really helpful to take this class to be able to gain like real life experience. And so it's a sub-advisory board of the United Way in this area, and you were given money to be able to grant to organizations in Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties. And it's not just that simple. We actually had to create a mission, vision, and values. We had to work with the organizations, which was a little bit more challenging with COVID, but everyone was online with Zoom at that point. But we still got to get out and about as well. Work very hands-on with their financials in the background to really understand if we were donating to financially sound organizations. So analyzing their financials and applying that again to real life scenarios, and meeting with the advisory board to get their advice, to seek kind of counsel on who we were planning on investing in. And investing, it was $150,000. So I think it's upwards of $200,000. I'm actually on the advisory board, so I should know that. I just joined the advisory board after the class. But in my opinion, hands-on is really, really key for myself. That's how I learned. Other people all learn differently though. So I think it's good to have a mix of classes. Some people prefer, a textbook, a lecture. I prefer hands-on. And so that class to me was a game changer in the program. I didn't talk about something I applied it to, but I'll kick it on to someone else.
I can give a couple of examples. There was a Professor Bruce Gates in the early years, and for many years actually, who was particularly strong in modeling and statistical analysis, I would say. And his class was extremely valuable to me when we were trying to figure out how to size certain components of a hospital. In other words, almost the inventory model that you see, where you have the emergency room, you then have the ICU, for instance, and then you have the general acute care nursing units and all. And as you move patients through those, you create vacancies in the one prior. And as you move them through, you also create a need in the next. And so modeling that, it ended up in a consulting engagement being able to build at Premier Inc. a model that actually visualized that, with little ambulances driving up to the emergency room and dropping off patients and then moving through the hospital and looking at the time it took at each spot and the need for a certain number of beds in those different kinds of settings. Second one would be Dr. Peterson, who really taught accounting. You think of accounting as kind of the boring side of things, right? It's just plus and minus, debits and credits. But in fact, it came to be very, very critical to us when Medicare changed the way that it paid for hospital services from a fee-for-service based on cost-based reimbursement to a DRG payment system, identifying diagnoses, grouping them together, and setting a payment rate for each group of those diagnoses, doing that in advance. All of a sudden, a radiology image was not generating revenue. The patient coming through the door with that admitting diagnosis was generating revenue. Well, how did you account for whether you were losing money or making money on it? It was a whole new approach. We looked, when I was down at Sacred Heart in Eugene, we looked at how are we going to identify whether we're in a profit or loss situation on these. And using some of those cost accounting techniques that I learned at the MBA program there at Atkinson, I was able to work through, there really were no hospital-based cost accounting systems at that point in time at all. We kind of piggybacked on Global, which was a software company that was using a cost accounting system in manufacturing, but built it into healthcare and proceeded to implement a detailed procedure level cost accounting system at Sacred Heart in Eugene that later developed into a whole new staffing system, AcuiDoc, developed into a consulting group that implemented the system in 40 plus hospitals around the country. But all of that related back to Dr. Peterson and the cost accounting training.
I would toss out a few classes, and my students know that I am adamant about these. If you're going to be a health lawyer, admin law, accounting, I don't know how you practice in this area without knowing some accounting. Obviously contracts in law school. And one of the things, if you look at health law, it has really two components. It has a component of business, which is where I spend most of my time, but it also has a personal component. And we saw that during the pandemic, where people say, these are my rights. I have a right not to take a vaccine. And this all goes back to a case of the early 20th century, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which allowed states to make their own policies. And so that's an individual issue. So one of the things that I think is important is to know a fair amount of constitutional law, because you may get involved in that. And there are quite a few people, including one of my students who's here today, who has worked in that area of individual rights. Now, if you're also going to work in the area of fraud and abuse, criminal law and criminal procedure, you do get panicked phone calls from people who say, I was just indicted, and you have to learn to run with it. I usually immediately call a friend of mine to get it done. But you have to at least know the procedure and how things work, because every single day I get reports from the Department of Justice, and every single day doctors and laypersons and so forth are being sentenced to 5 to 10 with a $500 million penalty for violating Medicare rules.
Yeah, so if I were to give you like classes to take, I take I drill down on 3 classes and 3 areas of classes, and I think there's already been hit on here. First off is org behavior. So when I was in school, I had to take the mandatory org behavior. I just kind of blew it off. I would say you're in healthcare and it's a people business. Okay, it's all about people. And we have the blessing in healthcare to be able to transform people's lives or work for organizations that transform people's lives. And you got to understand how people think, how they work, how you motivate and change behavior. Those are some things. Like I used to sit in the back row and I just kind of org behavior. I just blew it off. I wish I would have taken about 100 of those classes, because it's just important. Number 2, it's already been hit on, is I'd get your hands on anything related to healthcare compliance. So you've heard things like HIPAA, Stark laws, anti-kickback rules, key provisions of the Affordable Care Act. So like what Katie was saying, you don't have to be an expert in all these areas, but you better be able to spot the issues and then bring the experts in. And so like what Bruce was saying, so yeah, if it's, I love that. What you said is, if it's okay in business, it's probably illegal in healthcare. That's kind of true, you know? I hate to say that, but that's just kind of how it works. And then the last thing is, it's already been touched on, is finance and accounting. I know you hate those classes. You got to understand. I'd get your hand on the finance classes. I'd get your hands on every accounting class, because here's what it is. There's so much of healthcare because it's clinically driven. You're providing care for patients, and that's where it needs to be. Okay. But here's the reality of it. Okay. Is business issues dominate everything. And so much now that, the margins in healthcare are so skinny, okay, that it's not, healthcare organizations don't fail or get into trouble typically because of providing bad care. Okay, that sometimes happens, but where does it really happen is I'm not taking care of something on the business side. So you got to understand the economics of healthcare. And I would say even now more than ever in the COVID era, because the COVID era, I mean, it hammered healthcare providers. And so you just have to understand the economic realities that go with being in the healthcare industry.
I might just add one other plug for lean management. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that Denise Hoover is still teaching the lean management course. I didn't take it because I work with her. I thought it would be weird to be taking a class from someone I work next to, but healthcare, it's very much across the board. Multiple organizations use lean management.
Yeah.
And so Toyota, think the Toyota method, and that's just a helpful kind of like back to the org chart. I mean, that's
Yeah,
you even
lean
your little exercise with the time-based studies is lean management.
Okay.
And so taking that course, I think, and knowing a little bit about everything is going to behoove you in your career.
Your responses to that question are pearls of wisdom to me and Brian, because we are facilitating work to develop some programming that would be jointly offered by our schools. And so you've given us a lovely draft menu programmatic idea. So thank you very much for that. We're very excited about this work.
If I might say also, if you're going to be working in a hospital system and it's nonprofit taxation is very important.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Absolutely. Okay, wonderful. All right, question 3. So I would like for you to tell us about a BHAD, B-H-A-D, which stands for Big, Hairy, Audacious Problem that needed to be solved in healthcare during your career. How did you use your education and experience to help solve this BHAD, or at least attack it?
Okay, I guess I'll jump in. I think mine is probably similar to Katie's. I mean, we're just living it. I mean, how do you run a healthcare organization in a global pandemic? I mean, there's no playbook for that. And it impacts every part of your academics here. So I was thinking, so for us, when they shut everything down, March of 2020, I mean, it was insane. And so we have inpatient operations, we have outpatient operations, stuff in schools and universities and high schools. And we saw our volumes drop anywhere from 40 to 70% in some of our locations. I see Katie shaking her head here. Yeah, so what do you do with that, right? So there's the economic issues, okay? Like, what do? You still have the staff, but you're down 40 to 70% in volume, okay? There's HR issues. So what it led for us is, it broke my heart, but we had to furlough 40% of our company at one point in time. And I remember saying, man, I'm not sending you an email on that. I'm going to look you in the eye and I'm going to have those conversations. And I'll tell you what, after I got done at the last clinic, I cried all the way home, and I just cried all the way home. And we're a top workplace, and I just furloughed 40% of the company. Legal and compliance. I mean, I'm sure Katie and others can tell you. I mean, we had a new requirement from the Oregon Health Authority or the CDC every day. I would send out updates, and I think one day I actually sent out 10 updates to the company, and they said, "Can you just please stop? Just please stop right now. You can pick them up tomorrow." So there's your compliance issues. You have your vaccine mandates. Okay. So all the issues, all the legalities, moral issues, whatever you want to call it there. And you just never knew what was coming next. And then patient care issues. Oh, by the way, we still have all these patients that need care who don't know what the heck is going on. And now they're in a whole new different paradigm of how they receive care. I mean, we've been around 45 years. I mean, how do we still provide the same level of care that we're accustomed to and what the communities demand of us and expect of us in the middle of the pandemic? And then I think what it did, though, it made us better. I'll tell you that. It made us better. And I think what the understanding the intersection between business and law and healthcare, that was a major strength. I'm sure you saw that at Salem Health. I mean, Salem Health is amazing during the pandemic. But and I'll just say this too, that's where you really see what your organization is made of. Mm-hmm. When you go through that adversity, that's where you really see what people are made of. And so that's where I would say that BHAG. Oh, yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday. I was going to say something about the Affordable Care Act. Like, no, absolutely.
That's old news.
Yeah, that's so old. And isn't it like we call it COVID is kind of like dog years. Okay, so it seems like it's a dog years, like 7 years. It seems like the COVID era has been like 14 years instead of 2 years. But I think that's the big BHAG for me is it's got to be running a healthcare organization in a global pandemic.
Yeah, I would say the same. And actually, when we're talking about what classes to take, it's like you're taking a new class every week. You have to keep up on all of the things with any industry, but especially with healthcare. And there are so many changes all the time. You have to keep up on it and rely on your subject matter experts, right, within your organization. But you can't completely rely on them because something's come up. And like, wait, did you read that really fully from the OHA? And so the trust but verify, right, is my mantra that I live by. So I started at Salem Health in May of 2019. I'd worked at the Portland Clinic before for many years as their chief operating officer. And shortly after I started, I learned that we were going to be acquiring through mergers and acquisition a very large primary care, multiple clinics in the area. And they were owned by the IPA, who was then selling them off to the hospital. And so I really started diving into that work. And it took a lot of time. And there was a lot of other things that the medical group needed my attention, others' attention, and got a whole new leadership team in. And then this acquisition happened January of 2020. They all became employed. Some of them didn't want to be employed by the organization. They had sold their practices off to this IPA, who did not tell them that they were in negotiations, in the recent months, and then were sold to the hospital. And so we actually had one clinic in the last summer that left totally and went with another organization, which, I wasn't surprised because, physicians, when you've owned your own clinic, and these were all independent, it was not a cohesive group. It was like 6 independent clinics, right? So COVID hits in March. I'm ready to go on my European vacation to Croatia. And I hadn't been on vacation all year because I'd been working on this acquisition. I was ready to leave. And I was like, wow, I can't leave. And so just dug right into work. And just as you said, things changing every single day. And so we just acquired these clinics. We had no culture across primary care and built. And we'd also, we've been talking about building up a new cardiology clinic, which we just opened in September. And so we had all of these irons in the fire, and then this hit. And so not good timing. But to your point, it really makes you see what an organization is like when something major like this happens. I had to, in a matter of an hour and a half, decide which clinics we were going to close, which clinics we were going to keep open. And I didn't do it on my own. I called in finance, I called in legal, I called in HR, and we had this team kind of huddle, and I literally had to announce to the group what we were going to consolidate. And we didn't furlough anyone. We had a labor pool. We kept everyone whole, but we did consolidate clinics. And so when we acquired these groups, we had clinics down the street from each other. We had quite a bit of space. But again, culturally, when you've lived and grown up in a clinic as a clinician, you don't want to go to the clinic down the street. That was your competitor like 3 months ago, right? And so we brought people together physically, and they understood why we had to do it. They asked for months and months, so when are we going to go back to our other space? And I was like, well, we realized that we can keep here together. And so it's really been a matter of communication, really being out there and listening. We still have a lot of work to do because we have been in a time warp. And I'm supposed to go abroad on Thursday, so I gosh darn hope that I can get out of it. I feel like I haven't. It's like, what have I done in the last year? I am not sure. Ireland. Yeah.
Very good.
Anyway, so it's like I'm not sure what has happened, and yet you feel like I was brought into the organization to help grow the medical group, and we feel like we've been surviving. Again, changing regulations, being really nimble, and just being a student every single day to learn what is happening around us and what we have to comply with. At the same time, working on the culture. So challenging.
Probably my biggest one was the financial turnaround that the dean referred to down in Burbank, California. 660 bed hospital, 122 nursing home beds on top of that. A couple of medical groups, different things going on. All of a sudden, managed care hit that environment in the San Fernando Valley. And what we what we were faced with was a precipitous decline in volume. Now, you have to respond to an operating loss of about $12 million in a single year and turn around and turn that profitable again, because healthcare is a combined capital intensive and human intensive. If you stop and think about that, 50+% of your operating costs are usually labor costs. And yet on the other hand, you have heavy equipment needs, MRIs, CTs, you name it, structures, buildings, et cetera, that you have to support. So you need a bottom line, even in a not-for-profit, in this case, Catholic hospital. And that needs to be probably 3 or 4%, maybe even a little more or less, depending on inflation and where you're headed in your capital cycle and all. And so had to turn this around. Well, one of the important things you learn in an accounting class at the MBA program is clearly that there's not just cost cutting in order to improve the bottom line, but there's also revenue growth. And so in the healthcare environment, how do you grow your revenue? You bring in more patients. You bring in more patients who have a payment stream with them to help increase your revenue stream. And in our case, while we did have to hit the cost side, we went from 2,600 down to about 1,850 employees. Think about how many people we lost in that case. But I always look back on that and I say, we saved 1,850 jobs for folks. Their jobs became a little harder because in many cases they're picking up pieces of what somebody who was leaving had been doing. And so we hit that side, but we also brought in more than 100,000 capitated lives that we set up a new approach of risk sharing with the insurer, Cigna, who had taken these lives to Medical Center North Hollywood and instead brought them across under a contract that capped the level of cost for Cigna, but created a shared risk pool that the hospital, in one of the first hospitalist programs in the country, under Dr. Adam Singer down in Burbank, put together to manage the care of those patients cost effectively, but clinically productive in the sense of quality outcomes that were needed as well. And so we're able to turn that around. It was a 3-year plan to turn around the finance of the hospital. We turned it around in about 18 months. And I give you one really fun one, and that was at OHSU. We had a wonderful donation, 2 different donations of waterfront campus down along the Willamette River there in Portland. And all of a sudden, we had 2 campuses that were totally apart. One up on the hill with a windy Terwilliger to get up there at all, and one down on the waterfront, the other side of I-5. So you had to wind your way down there as well. So how are we going to bring that together? Well, working with the city and their Department of Transportation, the State Department of Transportation, and with a Swiss operations management group, we put in the aerial tramway that carries people up and down, and we're able to solve that problem for us too.
I've seen that tram often.
Little silver eggs.
Yeah, that's right. Well, first of all, I wanted to make you've been talked about learning on the job and so forth. And I think one of the best things that I've ever seen was over the door at the law school I went to. Was Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, "The life of the law is not logic; it is experience." And the longer you practice in this area as a business person and whatnot, you build up this wonderful background so you can understand the context of things. My big hairy deal, and it's sort of come back in some ways, back in the late 90s, the equity folks wanted to buy into healthcare. It's a huge industry. There's a lot of money to be made. There was a bank robber in the 20s. His name was Willie Sutton. And they asked Willie, "Why do you rob banks?" He said, "That's where the money is." Well, with a $5 trillion industry, that's where the money is. And there's a lot to be made. But there's, we had, or I didn't have, but all of a sudden I was called into a deal that a couple of young doctors had signed into. And they wanted to get out of. The idea would be, here comes the equity people. We will pay you $1 million for your stock, and you'll basically come work for us, and here's the structure and so forth. Well, they hadn't noticed, the equity folks hadn't noticed what's called the corporate practice of medicine prohibition. And those of us in here who are not physicians can't hire physicians. Now, Oregon's a little wishy-washy about that, but the rest of the states are not, 5 or 6 of them. And so I was in Texas at the time, and so I ended up with 35 national clients all over the country who had bought into this gig. And it took us probably 5 years to get rid of the company and work its way out. They went into bankruptcy, and we had to work that whole thing. Now, here's the funny thing. The French like to say, the more things change, the more they remain the same. I've got groups looking at equity plays right now. Same thing. Because there's this conflict. It's right to make money. You got to, even in nonprofits, no margin or no money, no margin. Right? You got to do it. But at the same time, do you have a professional duty to focus on the patient good? And please understand, the business of healthcare is not like going to a Toyota dealer. You hit the gurney in the emergency room and you have no negotiating power. You cannot say, oh, it's Percocet. Now, there's a cheaper one. Doctor, can you give me that? It's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So that is the dynamic that goes all the way through. And haven't been in it as long as I have. It hasn't changed in all that time.
Well, in our last question of kind of the formal program, I wonder if we could turn our attention to the career side of things. So a 2-part question. So generally speaking, where do you think the biggest intersections are between law and healthcare and business, kind of all wrapped in one? And then 2, where do you think the opportunities are for healthcare leaders to practice corporate social responsibility?
I'll give you one word: data. I think that's the big area of the future, data aggregation, the interpretation of it, because that's how everything is working.
And I would say, I mean, every day that they intersect, and we shouldn't be proud of our GDP and the money that we have in healthcare. I mean, you compare us to other countries, and it's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing.
So, social responsibility is doing what's right by the patient when they're on that journey to give them the best medication, but the one that's the best cost, right? We just built an ambulatory surgery center. You can see it right across the way there, and we'll be moving patients out of the hospital into that center. We're going to lose a lot of money. Millions of dollars on that, but it's the right thing to do for the patients. The patients are going to go in a lower cost setting appropriately. You can do total joints now, et cetera, in this lower cost setting. And so I think with every decision every day that you make, you're furloughing your employees. That's an intersection right there. I mean, there's every decision. I really believe that it's multifaceted. You can't just think one dimensional on anything.
I think healthcare is one of those industries that really requires people to think, as you say, we're not going to a Toyota dealership. We're in fact, take care of people. These are not widgets. These are people that we're taking care of. And every decision that's made in healthcare eventually flows down to that patient. It really does. And I started my healthcare career in Catholic hospitals, where there were sisters who were out there as CEOs, leading the hospital with a mission in mind. And that mission was not one of making a lot of money. That mission was one of patient care, taking care of patients. And today we still need those people who are taking care of patients, but people who are in the business management side who think of the patient when they make those decisions. I was talking with our lawyer here at one point about 2 different legal groups that I worked with in 2 different healthcare systems. The internal counsel in one was very good, sharp, could identify where the legal obstacles were in doing things, and that was it. The other one was great too at identifying where the obstacles were, but always came up with solution options. You know, you can work it this way if you structure it like this, because there's a safe harbor that's already been granted for that, or there's whatever. And with so many transactions, you're trying to do it to make it work for the patient, make it work for the physicians who are caring for that patient, make it work for your nurses who are caring for that patient, right on down the line. And you get these legal questions. And I tell you, I hope that any of you who become healthcare lawyers would in fact be that second kind of healthcare lawyer. Contribute to the success of the organization that you're investing in. You're investing your life, your personal responsibility and accountability in.
Yeah, I would say if you understand the intersection of the law and healthcare, I think you'll be a unicorn. That's what I would say. So I get to see a lot on what I do in my sector of healthcare. I get to see a lot nationally. And if you get this stuff, you will definitely set yourself apart because there's not a lot of people who understand this, you know. And so that would be my first thing. And then if you have any aspirations for, I would say, senior leadership in a healthcare organization, that will bode you well. I think to be able to understand the issues, to identify them, and then when you get to a certain level in an organization, you have influence. Okay, and then you can actually do something about it, whether that's in your organization or the communities that you serve. Let me give you an example. I'll just tell you. I don't know anybody drive down the Willamette Valley lately. It's changed, right? So I've been here 35 years in this valley, and it's changed, and it's changed a lot in the pandemic. And so one of the things our organization did is, you know, we're active in the community, but we just said, like, how can we help? How can we partner with the communities to impact issues like the homelessness? How can we partner with the organizations like Habitat? I was driving around the other day and I wanted to cry, and then I got really angry, and we can do better than this. So, and then you can, you get to a position in your organization where you can use that as influence to make your community better. And I think that's what we should be wanting. And I know we're all different as people, but man, there's so much that unites us. And if we actually work together and we could, you can't fix everything, but if everybody just did a little and used the influence that you had, gosh, these communities would be a better place. And that's why we go into healthcare. I never thought I'd end up in healthcare. I thought I'd be a corporate tax attorney on the 17th floor of the U.S. Bancorp Tower. Now I'm in healthcare, and I thought I'd get out, and I've been here 30 years. But it's a great field to impact people, even if you're on the legal side of it, because you help these organizations structure things and stay in line with the compliance rules to change lives. I'm sure you hear it, Katie. If you're wearing your Salem Health gear, you bump into people in the community, like, wow, the impact you made. I don't know what it is in the pandemic. I wear PT Northwest gear. I get pulled over all the time from people. I was talking to some lady at Panera in Woodburn the other day. She was like bawling, how we made a difference in her life. That's something that matters. And to be a part of that, if you understand that intersection, man, that sets you apart. And if you want a rewarding career, healthcare is challenging, but it's a really, really good space to be in because you're making a tangible difference in people's lives.
And maybe just to reemphasize the point on data, I have to say value-based purchasing these days requires data. Risk management requires data. Anything
Accurate
really,
data.
Accurate data.
And they don't believe it, and then they find errors in it, and then
you've lost the best partner. Yeah.
I would also say there are tremendous opportunities, and I would recommend to every single law student and every single person in this room to serve on boards. You have a unique way of looking at things. And for example, I was on a drug and alcohol rehab board for about 6-7 years. And we got them through building a new facility and so forth. And one of the things, we have our board meetings, and we have a moment of mission where one of the people who was employed by this group, who had been a drug addict, talked about his or her story. And that was just unbelievable. So that's giving back to the community that way is phenomenally important. And healthcare helps you do it. I was on a transplant board that coordinated human transplant organs all over the state of Texas. Again, fascinating work, and you're helping people.
I was chairman of the Life Flight Network board, the helicopters that fly all around here and all. And we as a board were able to say, our agenda will not start with a financial report.
Yeah.
Our agenda will start, first of all, with flight safety, because if the aircraft comes down, it doesn't do anybody any good in any regard. The second was the quality patient care. If that transport isn't providing the care, then we're not meeting our mission either. And then finally, we look at what the financial performance was. And you as a board, you can control that. You can set those priorities for an organization.
Well, on that note, thank you. It was a great discussion. We'll turn over to Q&A, but first, would you join me in thanking the panelists? Well, we'd love to hear from you if there are questions out there.
Sure. So, I mean, there's a reason I'm here now. I'm not, that's not my strongest side, but what would you recommend for someone who wants to go in that field, but maybe not be very health? Oh, sorry. My name is Pablo Park. I'm a 3L here at One Block. So my question is, what do you recommend for someone who wants to get into healthcare, but maybe medical, it's not their strongest side? Has that ever been an issue for?
Never stopped me.
Okay.
I worked in retail for a long time. I was in human resources at Nordstrom, and I was actually hired by the Portland Clinic because of my background at Nordstrom, because they were looking for someone that had really strong customer service. Because if you think about, it's not buying a car, but you now have reviews out there. People are looking at the star reviews of the person that they want to seek care from. And so Press Ganey is a huge reviewer out there nationally. And that was just kind of coming about. And so they sought me out for that reason, is that they wanted to bring that component into healthcare. So it takes all kinds.
A lot of healthcare organizations have changed to a service line management or product line management approach. And in doing so, if you have a heart services, for instance, product line, you will often put a clinician and a business person together with a physician lead, and they'll be sort of the management team over the top of that service line. So it doesn't have to be somebody who necessarily came up through the clinical side.
I will point out also, and I mentioned at the beginning, these 20 some odd subsections of health law. Anyone who tells you that they can do more than 2 or 3 well, they're lying. Because each one is in depth, and it takes years to kind of get in it. But once you're in it, and as I tell my students, you can't just learn it, you must internalize it. So that immediately, well, wait a minute, that might be a kickback issue. Let's think about that. So it does not take, I have a science degree, but it was not in medicine.
And I was a history major. What were you all?
Political science major.
I was a political science major. There you go.
Good for you.
Biology pre-med.
So we all go on to do something else. More education.
Well, I worked on Wall Street for 5 years. So.
There you go.
So we don't have any questions online yet, but I have a personal question. My husband is a PT at Salem Health in the ICU today. He was on the COVID floor, and I'm wondering, we've worked at the university, we've had to make so many changes over the past couple of years, keep students engaged, keep parents informed and families. How, if people are your biggest capital, your biggest investment, how are you maintaining their well-being at a time when they're experiencing life-changing, unprecedented events?
We've been doing a lot of work on resiliency, and people are getting annoyed with that word all the time. Really, but I know. But we continue to. We're expanding our EAP program. We're looking at our benefit structure because some people seek that. My favorite event that we did this last year, you could go out and write something on a plate and break it. I won't tell you what I wrote on it. But it was totally good, and it was for employees only. But it was outside, like in front of the hospital. Patients reply like. So everyone has different ways in which some people are very private about it. Some people, again, we didn't furlough people, which, people felt good about that, but yet today they're just burnt out. People are done. On the management side, we've been trying to come together in different ways in person as we can. Today, we had a huge leadership meeting this morning where everyone, gathered in person. We can now take off masks in non-patient care areas. So sorry, your husband is still wearing his mask. Definitely like a full hood. Yes, a full hood. And keeping people informed, right, of what's going on and having, town halls and doing a lot of listening because that is, people some people just want to cry, some people want to yell, some people want to say thank you. And so, again, getting it out in different ways, but also having forums where people can come and talk to the CEO. And the executive leaders, myself and others, are all on that call because there might be questions for us. We've been doing those over Zoom over the last 6 months very regularly.
Yeah, I would just echo all of that. And I would just say, just be available for people. And we do a lot of the same things at Salem, but just checking in with people and just realizing everybody's got stuff. I don't care what it is. You've been doing this for 2 years. Everybody's got stuff. And so we do touch bases, we do one-on-ones. I mean, we do town halls, all that stuff. But we just make ourselves available. And then sometimes people don't need an answer. They just want you they just want to just say, like, the earliest call I've gotten, I'm an early bird, so the earliest call I've gotten during the pandemic from a member of the PT Northwest crew is, I think, 5:17. And then the latest one at night was, I think, 11:05 on a Saturday night. I'm not a night owl, but I'm sitting there by the fire with my wife, and this person keeps texting me. And she goes, I think you need to get that. And it was just somebody who, just needed to know. They just wanted to talk, right? And they just wanted to know, is it going to be okay? Is it going to be okay? And I think that's just being there for people is probably the biggest thing you do. And then just encouraging them. I don't know if you use this concept at Salem Health. We've done it a little bit of it's just having a battle buddy. Just having that other person that you can just connect with and just be there for them and touch base with them. Because again, we're all going through this thing and we're in a people field. So I think those are some things I would answer your question.
And being flexible too. I mean, again, I'm sorry, your husband, he can't work from home, but there are a lot of positions where people felt like they needed to be in the office at whatever time and be at their desk until whatever time. And really, people have realized that they can do their job, most people, in different areas. And so allowing that flexibility, and even in management, leadership positions, if you want to take your 6:30 in the morning meeting with physicians, from home, because a lot of them want to do it from home too, because they're shift workers and they want to come in when it's not their day. And they had been doing that traditionally because there wasn't these options. And so they want, everyone wants to, they're carving out little bits and pieces here and there for their family and recognizing that and meeting people where they are and not expecting what was. Again, if you're providing direct patient care, that's challenging, sorry.
Sorry.
He's gonna get a student, so he's excited.
Oh,
There's been ways to fill his cup. Yeah, there's been ways to fill his cup, so please don't think it was a dig.
No, but that's coming back to the students and because people we don't have a residency program at Salem Health, but we do have programs for students that can really take a load off of the people providing current care.
Well, folks have been emphasizing the people business side of things here. As I look back at my 47 years of healthcare, the thing that I enjoyed the most and probably learned the most from at the same time was doing night rounds on nursing floors and being able to take time and have the nurse be able to take time to talk about what was going on in her life during that day or his life during that day. The IT area reported to me, when you put in a new application in the hospital, who's it affect? It affects those people out on the floor. We talked about Epic, for instance, that electronic health record and all. But being able at 1 o'clock in the morning to sit down with a nurse and say, how's this working for you? That was the most rewarding thing, I think, in my whole career, most enjoyable thing as well.
There's a wonderful little book that was written in the early 80s called The 1 Minute Manager. And the principle is you do MBWA, management by walking around. And I think that's the best I've ever heard. And in the law, I deal with a lot of people who are frightened. Maybe their license is threatened. Maybe their freedom is threatened. And they want to be talked to. And I don't have answers for them right away, but I do talk to them. And I stay in contact with my folks every single day.
I got one more. So what do you guys notice is the biggest effect of data on the economics in terms of financial relationships? So ROI? I mean, what do you, ROI, doctor cost over patient cost? Is there some financial terms of analysis that you guys see, especially with this drive for data, is maybe the most, opportunistic? What is being highlighted right now, if there's any that you can think of as what needs to be explored more?
Take that position, I'll take that.
Okay, there's a lot of different data points that you can look at. One of the things, I'll just throw out something we've been looking at really recently is our relative value units. So you get paid, again, by insurance companies, and there's a weight that they place, and essentially it's and there's been a lot of changes even last year. There's time-based billing now, which is great. But we have found, and as we acquired this group and brought them on, that the ROI in terms of, and I think a lot of health systems are facing this, where you bring on these physician groups and you think, there's not money in that per se. I mean, this is why groups are closing their doors and being acquired by systems. There's money on the downstream, which again, be careful with Stark Law, you didn't speak to that, but there's money on downstream revenue. So when a patient comes into the hospital and hits all those doors and gates. But on the outpatient side, again, this is why it's hard to put a shingle up, because the reimbursements are hard. And you can look at a lot of different data points. I was just playing around with some numbers, in terms of their RVU per physician per hour. And you can dive into and pull in information on their staff. A lot of people are now wanting to work part-time with COVID. They're like, I don't want to work full-time anymore. Okay, so you start looking at data around, well, I've got this full-time medical assistant. And I mean, you can pull together, especially with electronic medical records. Medicaid doesn't pay as well as commercial. And I know, shocking. And these private groups that are out there, like the group I worked for before, we took like this much government payer. For Medicare and Medicaid, it was like 10% of our business, whereas it's upwards of 60% of our business at the hospital side. So that does not match. And so you have to really look at making sure that your clinicians are appropriately coding without really pushing that, because that's a big, hairy legal topic that's happened, that's been made public in the last couple of years. But I've been really looking at that, at RVU production per provider, because some are really doing well and some are not. And so how do you partner? Physicians don't really like being told, what to do. And so you make the data visible. We do that on internal referrals too. We just post it. And they're like, wow, I'm like down here. They want to be all in the top. They're top of their class, right? And same thing with the RVUs and these different pieces, their production. And we make that visible. And the goal is that they go talk to their partner and ask, hey, what are you doing? Some of them are too proud to do that. Some aren't. But making data visible, data points are important, and then driving a conversation that way instead of telling someone or asking them to refer internally. Just post it up there and then talk about your financials every moment that you can. And of course, going back to patient care.
I think on the hospital side, there's several different areas. One is clearly on the clinical side, being able to look at standard treatment protocols and being able to identify the cost effectiveness and the quality outcomes of those using data for both. And usually creating modules within those that you can apply to build other standard treatment protocols as well. And in looking at that, using artificial intelligence to help manipulate that data, to bring it in, to apply it in those situations. Also on the hospital side, you often will, particularly in Southern California, a hotbed of managed care, you'll get into per member per month payments to the hospital. So you have to identify demographics. You have to look at what the likelihood of treatments required will be and all, what the cost of those are, what you must charge then to be able to cover those, and work that through the system as well. On the capital side, we did use return on investment, or we use a threshold return and only approve projects that were above that or were absolutely clinically necessary, which always drove the final decision as well. But you would use that on the capital side with the more traditional return on investment kinds of things.
Yeah, you bring up a good point around the payers, because each payer is very different, right?
Right.
We have a capitated arrangement right now. I think most people do in the Medicaid world, and they're in primary care only. And I keep calling the insurer saying, can you tell me how much we've coded and how much, what's the delta? And they're like, we really don't have that data.
And
I'm like, oh my gosh, you're the insurance.
In Southern California, we had two different IPAs. these are independent practice associations of physicians, corporate practice restrictions, and you couldn't employ physicians, even in the way that you do in Oregon here. But the one group believed that you managed the cost when they were receiving this per primer per month payment. You managed the cost by restricting access. You made it difficult. So
think of the hospital, that's where they can spend the money there. If they're capitated on primary care, it's a good move.
And the flip side, the other group was actually more aggressive in using data to show what kinds of preventive medicines treatments would actually keep a patient from having to come in for the more expensive ones. It wasn't a denial of a service. It was actually a proactive provision of preventive medicine. And so the data drove that kind of a decision. That second group was the one that persisted in the marketplace. The first group was subsequently acquired by others.
The first group kind of sounds like a VA if you didn't have to pay for it.
Can I give you something to think about? So here's, based on your, I'll give you something to think about. So healthcare was struggling before the pandemic. I would argue, and I think many would argue, COVID broke the healthcare delivery system in a lot of ways. Okay. And so what I would say is what's going to happen is you can't as a country spend what we spend, get the outcomes that we get, and it be sustainable given the demographic nature of our country. So you're in this conversation right now, you're in a really unique place. Healthcare is going to get reinvented. Okay, data is going to be at the heart of it, how that data is used. You know, you might have heard Michael Porter's, Professor Porter's value equation, okay, from Harvard Business School. It's going to be a value-based model. I really believe that. And you get to be part of, if you understand that intersection between the law and business, you get to be a part of reinventing an industry that is sorely needed by this country, but needs to do better. And in the disruption that's going to come, the opportunities that's going to come, if you get that intersection, you got tons of opportunities. So if I'm sitting in your seat, if I was sitting in that seat 30 years ago, man, my eyes would be open to something like that.
Before the country goes bankrupt. On healthcare.
Yes, on healthcare.
So I have a little additional edge here in that I grew up with the American system. I was from Detroit, and that is really where the American system of employers providing health insurance began. And that was in the late 40s, early 50s. Half of our country gets its insurance from employers. So that's a very different model than any other country. And just, when I'm sitting back and thinking big thoughts, I wonder, is that hurting our competitive edge in the world? So that's my thought for the day.
The sign of a great panel is when you just would love for the conversation to continue, but you've run out of time. And it has been a great panel. I've learned a lot today. And I want to thank all four of you for coming and sharing your experience, your knowledge, your wisdom about this incredibly complicated but fascinating industry. So on behalf of myself and Dean Galini, thank you all for coming. Thank you to our panelists.